Now, of course, the story that's running more and more in the headlines is, I mean, to be honest, I shake my head. Oh my goodness. Iran. What's happening is so blatantly obvious. If you've watched the movie of my life and work, Renegade, which you can get at davidicke.com, they show a clip of a talk I did, and where I'm talking about this sequence that would lead to Iran, and here we are. I've been saying it for so long, not because I'm a genius, but because if you do the research, it's bloody obvious. These Israel fanatics, known as neocons in America, produced a document in September 2000, talked a bit about it many times before, and they listed a series of countries they wanted to regime change. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran. And so they've been ticking them off. They've had a pushback in Syria with Russia, which was means they've not achieved that end, but they won't give up on that. And if they do manage to get a war with Iran, which is what they want, I think Trump necessarily wants it, but certainly the people around him want it in the military, and of course John Bolton, the psychopath. And talking of psychopaths, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, the Vice President, these are all owned by Israel. And when I'm watching this this news unfolding about Iran, even Tucker Carlson, one of the last remaining hosts, news talk show hosts, who is prepared to ask questions that others won't ask. I watched this morning an item he did on Iran, and it was very good as far as it went. You virtually get it nowhere else, where he's saying, well, hold on a minute, what are we doing wanting a war with Iran? I mean, where's the benefit for anybody? And he notes Bolton, and he notes William Crystal, co-founder of the Project for the New American Century, that came up with that list in September 2000, as pushing this Iran. But the elephant in the living room, well, I mean, think of anything bigger than an elephant, Think of a herd of elephants or whatever. The herd of elephants on the sofa is Israel. Because the neocons of the Project for the New American Century, people like William Crystal and his other co-founder, Robert Kagan, are basically, well, not that basically, they're agents of Israel. So is Bolton. Bolton is owned by Sheldon Adelson, the Las Vegas casino multi-billionaire, and Israeli media owner, very close to Netanyahu, owns Netanyahu, but he also owns Trump. He's the biggest funder of Trump and the Republican Party. So Bolton is Adelson's man, which means he's Israel's man, and has been all along. Bolton was involved in the Project for the New American Century with these other two jokers, not in the funny sense, Kagan and Crystal. And so Carlson was absolutely right. But what's missing is the name of the real source of all this, which is Israel. Israel's wanted a war with Iran, a war on its behalf, by America having a war with Iran, all along. And so that's what's driving this Israel fanatics are all around Trump, not least his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, lifelong friend of Netanyahu. So this is why it's happening. And of course, they're ramping it up. Now, it seems very clear that despite being owned by Israel, as he absolutely is, this is why the embassy was moved to Jerusalem. This is why the Iran deal was, that nuclear deal that's kicked all this off was deleted when it was, everything was, calm before then. That's why they deleted the Iran deal, so this would kick off. But it's very clear that he is reluctant to go with this war in Iran, which he's being pressured to do. And one of the reasons, if he's got any brains at all, and I'm sure he's got a few, and has become much more streetwise about certain things since he's been in office, he will know that if America goes to war with Iran, not only will it define his presidency, the presidency that went to war with Iran, and that will not be treated well by history, just as George W. Bush was not treated well by history, quite rightly, with the lies to get us into a war with Iraq, and Obama lies to get us into a situation where Gaddafi was removed in Libya with all the catastrophe that's followed. So Trump certainly won't want that, and he'll know that that's what's going to happen. But another thing that anyone with a brain will realize is that Iran is not Iraq, and it was going to be a lot more difficult with Iran. I mean, this week American drone aircraft was taken out by Iran, and they won't mess about. It will get very messy, to say the least. And the other thing that Trump will know is that a tremendous amount of his support that got him to be the president in 2016 came from his contention during the election campaign, his promise, really, that America would stop getting involved in foreign wars and manipulating other countries. And so it's pretty clear that at the moment there's the Boltons and all those around Trump that are pushing for this war with Iran, which has been long. I mean, how long have I been saying this was the plan? Talking decades now. It's just a matter of the sequence and the situation unfolding to allow them to go for it. And so you've got this Trump now surrounded by this Israeli cabal, not least thanks to Sheldon Adelson. But Trump is pushing back against it as best he can. He doesn't want to push back too far because that'll upset Adelson, who owns it. But he can see the writing on the wall. And if he does go into a war with Iran, then he's going to lose a hell of a lot of support from those who voted for him in 2016 on the basis of he was saying we're going to stop these foreign wars and we're going to stop getting involved in the affairs of other countries militarily, etc. Well, you've seen the build-up that has happened as they went through national security advisors that Trump appointed until they got the one that they really wanted, which was John Bolton. And once he got in and got his feet under the table, all this started kicking off again with the attempts to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which up to this point has failed because people are getting more and more streetwise to how this works. I mean, what's happening in Iran now, and or in relation to Iran, and what happened in the propaganda run up to justify the war in Iraq, the war in Libya, the war in Syria, is just the same, and people are starting to see it. Some of us have been pointing it out for a long time, but more and more people are now beginning to see it. And so it's not as easy, an easy sell as it was before, much as, you know, most of the media are pushing it, well, for obvious reasons. Who owns the media in America particularly? So we now have this story of the US military preparing for a possible conflict with Iran, which says, amid fears that the US is running headlong into yet another sure to be disastrous war in the Middle East, Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan told reporters that the Pentagon is prepping contingency plans should things quickly escalate militarily. Well, the kind of the point of the conflict, the center of the conflict zone, if you like, is this Strait of Hormuz, through which it's said 15% of the world's oil passes in the tankers, etc. What you've had is the allegations that Iran has been attacking tankers going through that area with mines. I mean, it's almost pathetic, really. The Iranians had the Japanese Prime Minister visit because they were trying to get Japan on board. Because one of the other things that's happening is that the Iranian economy is nosediving because of the American-imposed sanctions. That they're using sanctions as a weapon of war. I mean, America and Iran are already at war, just isn't militarily expressed yet. But in terms of economy and sanctions, they're at war. So you invite the Japanese Prime Minister to visit Tehran because you want to get him on board. And then what you do is you attack with claimed limpet mines tankers carrying oil to Japan. I mean, it's hilarious, really, if it wasn't so pathetic. I mean, who benefits from that? Because Iran don't. But who does benefit? Well, America does, of course, and Israel does, and Saudi Arabia does. The trio of evil at the controlling level that wants a war with Iran. And so it's got so pathetic now. You've got Pompeo, the Secretary of State in America, who walks into a press conference, says we have intelligence that Iran was behind these attacks on tankers, then walks out. Don't take any questions, because, you know, if any journalist with a brain on active duty asks sensible questions, of course, Pompeo would be gasping for air. Never mind words, because he don't have any answers, because he's making it up. And so it's all so blatantly obvious. And at the moment we are at the cusp with the gang, the cabal pushing, and Trump, not least for personal reasons of getting re-elected, and presidential legacy, quote, can see the consequences coming, and he's pushing back. But of course, the way they work is that they'll keep creating these problem reaction solution scenarios, others people call false flags, until Trump caves. The hope is that he becomes aware enough of the way this works that he doesn't cave, but that's the game. And of course, what happened in Syria very early in his presidency when he said he wouldn't be intervening in other countries and in military expeditions in other countries, that he was told by the same cabal that Assad in Syria had been responsible for a chemical attack on civilians. A total lie. And Trump, believing them, unleashes missiles at Assyrian targets. So we're looking at the same. You can only hope, like I say, that Trump is looking at this from a personal point of view and a personal consequence point of view and a presidential re-election point of view. Because this Israeli cabal couldn't care less about Trump. He's just a vehicle for them. They also own the Democratic Party, so whoever comes in will still be the same, basically, in terms of what Israel wants. But we can only hope that he's become streetwise enough by experience up to this point that he won't fall for the problem, reaction, solution scenarios that clearly the American military and intelligence neocon cabal has planned to wear down his reluctance. Another interesting story this week in relation to the same basic theme: Israeli submarines suspected of sabotaging shipping in the Gulf of Oman. In case of conflict with Iran, oil prices could double overnight, because there is, of course, a big economic agenda, global economic agenda involved in all this as well. This story at Global Research website says it is known that the US has for long had a comprehensive and combined plan with Israel to attack Iranian targets with huge non-nuclear bunker-busting 10-ton anti-blast air blast bombs capable of destroying the deepest underground installations. These are the most powerful non-nuclear ordnance pieces ever produced. But first, the Trump-Netanyahu war plan needed a credible excuse. It is also known that the Israeli military have been an integral part of the US plan to first cripple the Iranian economy with global oil sanctions, and then to initiate an air and sea attack against the Iranian state and its people. But first, a credible excuse was required. Well, not credible with anyone with brain cell activity that's discernible, but credible for those who haven't. That excuse was orchestrated jointly by a belligerent Trump and Netanyahu this week, when 2 oil tankers were structurally damaged by limpet mines off the coast of Oman. That's the way, in that whole Straits of Hormuz area. Subsequent to a similar action the previous week, and the sabotage immediately blamed by US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo without any evidence whatsoever upon Iran. However, the state actor concerned was almost certainly not Iran, the story says, but very probably the Israeli Navy with its state-of-the-art German-built nuclear-armed submarines covertly patrolling the deep waters of the Gulf. Iran, of course, unlike Israel, has no nuclear weapons of mass destruction, but does have a nuclear power program. And it is these non-military installations that the combined forces of the US and Israel are determined to destroy at any cost in order to further cripple Iran's civil infrastructure, in addition to enforcing a global ban on its oil so as to decimate its economy and to force yet another regime change. Again, I've talked about this before. Another massive reason for sanctions on countries is to create economic deprivation, which creates the environment, the atmosphere for people rebelling against the government. But again, as we saw in Venezuela, or at least up to this point, enough people in Venezuela are now aware enough of how this works for them not to fall for the scam of targeting the government. I'm not saying the Venezuelan government is, whiter than white. Absolutely not. Same with Iran. But to not blame the government for what is being instigated from outside of the country, to get the government to be blamed and therefore overthrown by the people, so that an American, someone acceptable to America comes in. And so it's not as easy as it used to be, as they're now finding. So the deliberate, the story I'm going on, continuing with, the deliberate sabotaging of 4 shipping tankers in the Gulf and the 2 obvious accusations against Iran indicate that US-Israeli plans for a combined attack against the Iranian state are now fairly imminent. And that fact should make the world take notice, because such unwarranted and unprovoked aggression against a sovereign state could very easily escalate into a global conflict. That's the idea. These are very dangerous times indeed, with an unpredictable and unstable US president determined to instigate war in the Middle East with a committed partner who has long wanted to destroy Iran in its own bid for regional dominance. Not just regional dominance either. The point is, though, as I've just been talking about, Trump is not being, at the moment, emphasis at the moment, so bellicose on Iran, because, in terms of a war, because he sees the personal consequences of it. Because, they hung George W. Bush out to dry. Not that he wasn't happy to be hung out to dry, because all the benefits he's got from it. But and they'll hang these presidents out to dry, including Trump, because they're just puppets. They're not the ones really in control when push comes to shove. Of course, Russia is again a target in all this. As I've been saying in relation to Iran, they want a war with China and Russia, with Iran pulled in, plus other allies of Russia and China, into a global conflict. It's been the plan all along. Whether they'll put it off is another thing. As people do get more and more streetwise to the way the game is being played. It's why you got all the censorship on the internet. It's because they don't want this information circulating.
People say I talk about some weird stuff, some far out stuff. But how about that chair that you're sitting in isn't solid? How weird is that? This reality is nothing like we think it is.
When I saw what ICKE is doing, I was a bit jealous on him. Wow, look at what this guy's doing.
I don't know if anybody else could do it but him, actually.
We are in a period now where speaking your truth is not just important, it's utterly crucial to where humanity goes from here. The world needs renegades.